Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Interventions and Detentions. I'm Brad, your host. And this episode's going to look and sound a little different this week. It's not about schools or education or interventions today. It's about a man who taught me more about life than any textbook ever could. My dad, Wayne, passed away this week at the age of 91. And I wanted to take this time in this episode to honor his life, his story, and the quiet legacy that he's leaving behind. I want to start out first by sharing his obituary because I think that'll give you a good glimpse and background of who he was, what he did, and the impact that he had. Wayne L. Taggart, 91, of Kendallville, Indiana, died Tuesday, October 28th, 2025, at Parkview Regional Medical Center in Fort Wayne. He was born September 2nd, 1934, in Wawaka, Indiana, to David A. and Edna Peterson Taggart. Wayne honorably served in the U.S. Army from 1955 to 1958. On November 9th, 1963, in LaGrange, he married Judy Hill. He started his work career at Yoder Popcorn in Shipshewana and also worked at Sealed Power in LaGrange. He then worked at Farm Bureau Insurance in LaGrange and Domex Insurance in Kendallville. He retired as an insurance salesman and realtor at the Howe LaGrange Agency in LaGrange. A dedicated official for the Indiana High School Athletic Association, Wayne served for more than 50 years officiating baseball, basketball, football, and track. One of the highlights of his officiating career was working the Indiana State Baseball Tournament in 1974. He was baptized at Cosperville Church and was a past member of the Wokeville Lions Club. Wayne enjoyed playing golf and attending the Indy 500 and Brickyard races, which he went to for many, many years. He was a devoted fan of Notre Dame football and IU basketball and just sports in general. Wayne also cherished living at Whistler Lake, where he made his home for over 40 years. His greatest joy, though, was spending time with his family, especially his 3 granddaughters. Surviving are his wife of over 61 years, Judy Taggart of Kendallville, 2 sons, Doug with wife Brenda Taggart of Wokeville, myself, Brad, and wife Sherry Taggart of Kendallville, 3 grandchildren, Taylor Taggart of Indianapolis, Madison Taggart of Kendallville, and Meredith Taggart also of Kendallville, 2 brothers, David, wife Marilyn Taggart of Fort Wayne, and Larry Taggart of LaGrange. Wayne was preceded in death by his parents and a sister, Rose Weaver. Wayne's funeral services will be Monday, November 3rd, 2025 at 11 a.m. at the Young Family Funeral Home, Wokeville Chapel, State Road 9 North, Wokeville, Indiana, with Pastor Angie Kidd and Pastor Reagan Ford officiating. Burial will follow at Woodland Cemetery in Wokeville. Honor Guard services will be provided by the Veterans Honor Guard. Visitation is Sunday, November 2nd, 2025 from 2 to 7 p.m. at the funeral home and 1 hour prior to the service on Monday. Memorials for Wayne may be directed to the American Heart Association. You know, reading those words out loud, it's one of those things to see them written down, but it's another to really hear them and say them. My dad lived a full life. Not a flashy one, but a really, really, really good one. The kind of life that leaves a mark through actions and not headlines. And he made a mark on people. And I'm really anxious to see when the viewing comes on Sunday and the funeral on Monday, what kind of turnout Dad has had on people. I think we're going to see a lot of people. We've already been contacted by so many people. I've had so many texts I shared the obituary on my Facebook page this week as soon as I could, and I think it's over 300, probably closing in on 400 comments right now. It's just crazy, the connection that he had with people. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and just celebrate my dad. So let's go way back. You know, we always jump in the time machine. Dad started his life in Wawaka, Indiana. He grew up on a small farm there with Grandpa and Grandma T, as I like to call them. It was one of those places where work started before the sun's even up. You know, the good old days of farming. I mean, I guess it still probably happens that way a lot of times. But, you know, this was before big machinery and things like that. Like I said, Dad was born in 1934. So as a kid, he's in the 40s and early 50s spending his time helping out on the farm. He never complained or made excuses, but he learned early on what responsibility looked like, taking care of animals and working in the fields, helping Grandpa and Grandma keep things running at the farm. Farm life built him. It gave him that quiet toughness that Dad had and that all knew and loved about him, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself ever. With Dad, if something needed done, he just did it. I feel like I think I've gleaned that from my dad. Sometimes it's easier just to do it when you see something needs to be done. And I think that part of him, that Wawaka farm grit, showed up in everything that he did for the rest of his life. Through this process of Dad being in the hospital for the past week, he went in on a Sunday night. It was a week ago this past Sunday. It's hard to keep track of time right now. I barely know that today is Thursday. But not this past Sunday, the week before, he had went in kind of complaining about shortness of breath, and he just didn't feel good, and he knew something was up. And, when we took him into our local hospital here in Kendallville Sunday evening about 7 o'clock and ran lots of tests and things. And, he's had congestive heart failure for a few years now and been dealing with that. But for the most part, pretty healthy and was still, mowing his own yard, driving to doctor's appointments, things like that. But Sunday night, it was different. And you could just kind of see it in his eyes, I think, too. He knew that something wasn't quite right, even though he was very alert, very with it, and not in any pain, thank goodness. But they did some tests and x-rays and determined that it would be better for his care to go to Fort Wayne to the Heart Institute. So at about 2 a.m, they loaded him up in an ambulance. Our family and my mom went home. I said, I'll go down with Dad. I didn't want him to go down alone that first night in the middle of the night without anybody there. So I drove down, and he actually beat me there. The ambulance beat me to the hospital. I was really kind of surprised, actually, but that's my dad. He's not going to let somebody get there before he does, by golly. And, he got settled in the room. And one of the first questions they always ask, or I'm assuming they always ask, hey, Wayne, if your heart stops, do you want us to take life-saving measures? And Dad immediately said yes. And I listened to that, and I was like, oh, I don't know if that's the right answer or not, but it's his answer, and I can't argue with that, and I'm not going to try to argue with it at that moment. So Dad wanted to be a full code if something happened during his stay. And, we didn't know a whole lot at that time yet. He had just gotten there. He was on a BiPAP mask at that point because he was having trouble breathing and his oxygen level was low in the ambulance on the way down. So they wanted to, kind of force some of that oxygen into him. So he was on that BiPAP mask, and he could take it off to eat, obviously, because it's, over your mouth and your nose. But it did help him for a while there. And the first couple days, they started running Lasix and things like that. They wanted to push fluid out of his system. The BiPAP machine would also help with that. And, he was, like I said, in pretty good spirits. Obviously, he wanted to go home. He doesn't like hospital stays. Nobody likes hospital stays. He would much be more comfortable in his home. And I don't think he really felt like, I don't feel terrible, so I don't know what the big deal is. But obviously, the fluid on his heart and lungs was a big deal. And unfortunately, the Lasix, the medication that helps move the fluid or push the fluid out, is really hard on your kidneys. And we discovered about Tuesday that Dad had stage 3 kidney damage or kidney failure for the last at least 2 or 3 years. We did not know that. That somehow got missed in his medical adventures over the last 3 years. So we really hit a road on Tuesday and had to have some hard conversations as a family. Dr. O'Shaughnessy, who is a kidney doctor, came in when I was there with Mom and Dad, and he sat down close to Dad and said, we're going to have a hard conversation, Wayne, because we're kind of at the fork in the road, buddy. We can be comfortable and go down that road, and I'll explain that road in a minute, or we can go down longevity for your life. And he said, if we're going to look at longevity, we're looking at putting you on dialysis starting today for the rest of your life. And Wayne, when I say rest of your life, I'm talking 0.2 years, maybe 6 months at the most. And he then went on to say that dialysis is going to be the most brutal thing that you've gone through. It's going to hurt. It's not going to be comfortable. It's not going to be fun. And it's going to be the most miserable time of your life. And those were pretty heavy words to hear, as you can imagine, as a family, and watching my dad absorb all that and process that, knowing that he right now is a full code, which means life-saving measures, which means, let's put you on dialysis if you so wish. And we didn't make any decisions that day. We danced around it, but talked about it. And my wife, Sherry, who's a nurse, as you well know, came over after work, and she wanted to know where we're at on all this. And I said, Sherry, we really haven't talked about it. I don't know, but I know we need to. And Sherry kind of stepped up for the family. And being a nurse, she's had these conversations obviously with patients before, never so much with relatives. I mean, her mom had a bad spell in the hospital where she was on a ventilator, and we had to make decisions to take her off the vent and things like that. So same but different in our situation. But she basically said, we need to have this conversation with Dad. Somebody needs to have this conversation. So when she got there Tuesday afternoon, she sat down alongside Dad and my mom and myself, and kind of, I don't want to say lay it out on the line, but she was super open and honest. And Dad appreciated Sherry and her honesty, and he wanted to have that hard conversation, no matter how hard it was. But we talked about what dialysis would look like. We talked about what, if your heart stops, Dad, and they start doing compressions, they're going to be cracking ribs and things like that. Is this what you really want? And we talked about his faith, because we never really knew where he stood on that. And he kind of surprised us all by saying, I do believe in God, and I pray for you guys every night as a family. I pray for my granddaughters and for you guys. And it was really comforting to hear that in the moment, but it was also good to see Dad come to the realization that, he's 91 years old, and comfort at this point might be better than longevity, because we know, if this is truly terminal, we want it to be as comfortable and as quality as we can for whatever time we have left with Dad. So it was at that point we were able to, get the code status changed. Dad decided he did not want to have life-saving measures anymore. They could keep the BiPAP machine on for a while. That didn't come off right away. So he was still getting oxygen. He was still getting meds. The next battle became to be, do we take him to a nursing home for hospice care? Can he qualify to stay in the hospital on hospice care? And Dad was doing pretty good still. He was eating like a horse Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. In fact, I think it was Thursday night, my brother and his family were there at the hospital. We were all there, and once we got that DNR status, he could get off of his cardiac diet, which was very strict, and he could pretty much eat now whatever he wanted, because again, we're going to make you comfortable and happy, Wayne. And he decided he wanted Fort Wayne, Coney Island hot dogs that night. So we went down and ordered, 19, 20 hot dogs for the family, and, chips and pop. And we sat around and ate hot dogs with him. And it was the best night ever. And what a great memory to have of those last few days. But, through that time, he was doing pretty good, and his oxygen level was staying pretty high, and he wasn't in pain and complaining. So when hospice from Parkview, the hospital would come in and evaluate him, they're like, yeah, we can't qualify him for hospice care because he's doing okay. And that Friday, at one point Friday, he was sitting in a chair, he was eating, he was, I would have thought Dad's coming home. But as many of you probably know, if you've ever had somebody that that's terminally ill, there's a point where they have this uptick and they start to do really well, but it doesn't last long. And it didn't last long for Dad, because Friday into Saturday things started to decline. and hospice came back in. I mean, we were kind of all set up with a nursing home on standby if we needed to for Dad. But hospice came in Saturday and they evaluated and they're like, he doesn't qualify yet, but I think let's give it another day. And Dad's wishes were, under the circumstances, he wanted to be in the hospital, to stay there on hospice if at all possible. He had great care, great nurses. They knew him, he knew them. It was just for a bad situation, it was as good as could be for Dad, and he was comfortable with that. So he really wanted to stay there. He did not want to go to the nursing home. He really wanted to go home, but that just wasn't an option because of the level of care that he required this week. And so Saturday into Sunday, it got even worse. He was not eating, not drinking. The body was starting to shut down basically. And hospice said, yeah, he can stay. He qualifies now. So we're, praising God for that, because that was a huge victory, I think, for us and for Dad, that we didn't have to transport him and move him. And now it was just a matter of making him comfortable. He got to stay in the same room that he was in. He didn't have to move rooms even. And, from there, Sunday into Monday was even worse. And Monday, I decided to stay with him overnight. Mom really wanted to, and it just, she was exhausted. And I told her, like, go home. It's okay, Mom, go home. I've got him. I'm going to be here with him. And, I won't go into details, but about 3 a.m, he passed away. So what that whole segment kind of leads up to is, when things are bleak like this, you start asking a lot of questions of the loved ones that are, affected. Like, I learned a lot about my mom and dad this week, things that I didn't know. And there's probably so much that I didn't get the chance to ask Dad through this process. But I learned some really cool things, and I'm going to share a few of those things now in this episode. So, like I said, through conversations, one thing that I learned about my dad, I knew he had attended Manchester University right out of high school for 1 year. And then he went into the Army with his younger brother, David, and they enlisted for 3 years. And they went over to Paris, France. It was non-conflict time, so it wasn't a scary time for them, and not a bad deal for the most part. But I had asked him, Dad, when you were at Manchester, what did you want to do? What were you going to school for? And he sat there for a minute and he said, well, I wanted to be a coach. And I said, well, what else? You can coach, but what did you want to do for your job? And he said, I wanted to be a teacher. I kind of assumed that, but I never really heard him say it. And it really hit me hard, because I was like, man, I was kind of living out his life dream of what he wanted to be originally. He wanted to be a teacher, and I hadn't really known that. And I think I've shared this a couple times here. I started out as a business major because my dad was a businessman. And I got into about my second year of school, and I really wasn't cutting it in my business classes. And it was my dad who told me, hey, buddy, you've got a couple days off a week. Why don't you go do some subbing in schools and make some money, so you're not just being a loafer. And when I did that, the very first day, a Friday morning at Topeka Elementary in Topeka, Indiana, in a 4th grade classroom, I came home driving, nervous as all heck, because I fell in love with teaching that quickly, and I wanted to ask my dad if it was okay if I changed my major to education. And I thought I would be the biggest disappointment to him. And when I come home and asked Dad and told him what a great day I had, and I said, hey, what would you think about me being a teacher? And he said, I think that's awesome. Just if that's what's going to make you happy, do it. But again, I didn't know that that's what my dad wanted to do. And it was so cool to learn that. It was a surprise to me, but it shouldn't have, because in a lot of ways, he was a teacher. He was always a teacher. He wasn't in a classroom. His plans changed when he joined the Army with his younger brother, and he served his country. And when he came home, he had been trying to save money. And when he was in the Army, he had been sending money to Grandma, his mom, to put in the bank. And I think it was a credit union in Albion, Indiana. And the owner of that embezzled pretty much all the money. And all the money that Dad had been sending home during his time in the Army was gone. And that was his college money. And that's why he didn't go back to school. And instead, his life got twisted, turned upside down, so to speak. And he had to join, or not join, but he went into the workforce. So he started at Yoder Popcorn in Shipshewana. I'm not sure what he did there. I don't know if he was in sales or if he just worked in the factory part. But Dad went straight to work. It was not bitter. There's no self-pity. He just, just that same Wawaka mindset. Well, we'll call it Wawaka mindset. You do what needs to be done to keep moving forward. He didn't gripe. He didn't complain. He went to work. And in that process, he also got into officiating and coaching. He coached a lot of Little League when he was in his younger years like that, still working and living at home at Wawaka. Like I said, he didn't teach professionally, but he never got too far from the game. He spent years as a IHSAA official, football, basketball, baseball, track. If there was a sport being played, the chances are he had the stripes for it. He also coached middle school basketball at Lakeland for many years, probably about 1985, 86, because I was an 8th grader and he started coaching 7th grade, my 8th grade year, and he did that for at least, I want to say about 10 years. Always wore a red Bobby Knight Adidas IU sweatshirt. I think he always tried to emulate Bobby, not to the extreme, of course, because talking middle school, 7th grade kids, but he was a coach that coached fiercely and passionately, and he wanted to win. He wanted his kids to be leaders on the court and off the court. And it wasn't just about winning. His kids that he coached, it was about learning how to lose, how to respect others, how to play fair, how to carry yourself when no one's watching. And Dad was so good at that. He was so good at that. I think back now and realize those were the same lessons that he lived every day. So I want to tell just another quick little story about how he and my mom met, because it was about the same time when he was early on officiating. And I asked Mom one night when I was bringing her home from the hospital last week, how'd you guys meet? I've never heard this story. So Mom said, her and a girlfriend one night on a Friday night, I think it was, had nothing to do. They wanted to go out and do something. So they went to Wawaka to watch the Wokaville High School team play the Wawaka High School basketball team. And her and her girlfriend walked into the gym and they're doing their thing. And my dad was there with his mom and dad, grandpa and grandma. And he wasn't working that night. He wasn't officiating. He was just there watching Wawaka play, his old alma mater. And he knew the Wokaville High School coach. And my mom had actually babysat for the high school coach's kids often. And so, he had waved at my mom and said, "Hey, Judy, how are you?" And she went and sat down, and my dad was talking to the coach. He's like, "Hey, who are those girls over there that you said hi to?" And he's, said the one girl's name, and he said, "Well, that's Judy Hill. She watches my kids." And he said, "Why, Wayne? What are you asking for?" And my dad just said, "Well, she's got really nice legs." And that was the start of Wayne and Judy. And Mom said about 2 weeks later, Dad had, got a hold of her phone number somehow. She lived at home with her mom and dad, my grandpa and grandma Hill in Wokaville, right across from the old high school. And he called her up and, I said, "Hey, I'd seen you at this basketball game. Are you seeing anybody? Would you like to go get a bite to eat, maybe go to a show?" And she said, "Yeah, I think I'd like that." Now, think about this. My mom doesn't know who he is. She didn't make contact with him that night at the basketball game. She knows he was there. She doesn't remember him, or she didn't get introduced to him. So she's kind of going into this like a blind date. And so fast forward to the night where they go out, and God love my grandma Hill. I could just see her doing this. She is peeking out the bathroom curtain windows, and my grandpa's giving her heck to get out of there, Evelyn, leave him alone. And Wayne pulls in his Oldsmobile Starfire, like baby blue, white top, all decked out. He's all decked out, gets out, and like Mom said, he had gray slacks and a shirt and tie and a navy blue blazer on, looking, to the hilt. And my grandma comes kind of running out to my mom, says, "Judy, if you don't get out there and go with him, I'm going to go with him." So he impressed my grandma right away. And Mom said they went out, they had a great time, went out again and again and again and again. And they had a great time, and one date led to another, which led to another. And here we are. So, during that time and through the years, Dad, like I said, loved IU basketball. He watched every game he could. And I swear he coached a lot from the recliner more than once. And like I said, when he coached middle school basketball, he kind of lived his life through Bobby Knight, I think, sometimes. But we went down to a few IU basketball games in Bloomington from time to time. He'd take me out of school a little bit early because it was, 3-hour drive down, 3-hour drive home. We spent more time on the road than we did at the basketball games, but had a great time. I can remember Coach Denny Harp, who was also a Lakeland High School guy, graduate. Denny was good friends with Coach Knight, and he got us tickets to go down with him one night, and we sat behind the bench, and it was an amazing experience. I can't remember who they played even, but just being there that close to the action and the players, but also Coach Knight, and just watching and listening to him. And the bad thing was they lost that night, but our plan was to go back to the locker room after the game. I was so excited, going to meet Coach Knight and face to face talk to him. And Denny went back in the locker room. He said, "Let me go back and see how things are going, and we'll probably be able to go back for about 5 minutes or so." And he come back out after about 1 minute and said, "Yeah, sorry, Coach Knight we're not going to be able to meet him tonight. It's not good back there." And we drove home and didn't get to meet Coach Knight, but, it was still a great experience. And, like I said, IU basketball, Notre Dame football, Brickyard 400 and the Indy 500. Dad went to those races for years. I can remember going to the Indy 500 probably as early as 6, 7, 8 years old. And Dad, being the penny pitcher that he was, would not buy me my own ticket because I was small and I didn't need a whole seat because they were bleacher seats. We usually sat right behind pit row, which was a lot of fun to see the action there. But I can remember we'd get to the gate and Dad would be like, "Hey, hang out here for a minute, just relax. Don't go anywhere. Stay right here. I'm going to run inside and we'll get situated. I'm going to run right back out with a ticket stub so you can get back in." So he'd go in and get settled. He'd bring one of his buddies' ticket stubs back out, come get me, and I'd get in to see the race for free. But that was just Dad. I mean, that's how he rolled. He was always looking to save a penny, a dime, or a buck somewhere. But, the roar of those engines and the tradition, he loved it all. And those are memories that I'm going to hold sacred to me from now until forever. So, his favorite topic of conversation wasn't sports, though. It was family by far. He loved talking about Doug and I, but more so his 3 granddaughters. He'd be at the Charger House in Ligonier for breakfast, and people would come in, and he would be telling them, "This is what Taylor's doing now, and this is what Maddie's doing, and Meredith's playing this sport." And he was so proud. Even during the hospital stay this week, a nurse would come in and he'd say, "These are my granddaughters, and this is what they do, and this is what they love." And he always found a way to brag about them humbly, but with a twinkle in his eye. He always had that twinkle and smile in his eye. And that's one thing I've heard this week is he was always smiling. Your dad was always smiling. He had those darn dimples that I didn't inherit. My brother got those dimples. My daughter, Maddie, has those dimples. And, like I said, he was proud of us all in the quietest but most genuine way. So I've been thinking a lot about what I learned from Dad. Not in any formal way, but just by watching. He taught me the power of humility. You don't need to be loud to be strong. Showing up every day consistently says more than any speech ever could. He taught me that real success isn't measured in titles or money or attention. It's measured in how you treat people. And I think that's one thing I pride myself on, our relationships and how I treat others, and I treat people the way I want to be treated. And, it's about how you work and how you love your family. And as I think about the work we do in education, helping kids grow, helping teachers lead, I realize, my dad, Wayne, he did that too in his own way. He just did it in fields growing up, in locker rooms, and in the stands and on the courts and in his office. He did a lot. And like I said, he impacted so many people. Dad's story started on a little farm in Wawaka and carried through 91 years of service. Service to family with a quiet integrity. He may not have been a teacher by title, but he taught me and everyone around him how to live with purpose, humility, and heart. That was my dad. That's my dad, and I'm always going to remember that. And I think everyone that knows him will remember those things about him too. Before we wind this down, I want to share what my daughter Madison wrote for his tribute. She shared his obituary on her Facebook page, and I think she sums it up the best. And I hope I can get through this. So this is what she wrote about my dad, her grandfather. To know him was to know how much he loved sports, especially basketball, collecting golf balls, and most importantly, his family. He taught me everything I knew about basketball and is the reason why I pursued managing basketball in college. I'll never forget our breakfast dates when I would be home from school. He always had to make sure everyone in the room knew what I was doing at school or what accomplishment I had recently earned. He may not have always outwardly shown his love in hugs and kisses, but he showed it by how he talked about his family. He was always so proud of all of us. He always pushed me to dream big, asking when I was going to be on American Idol or The Voice. He loved her voice. He truly never wanted us to give up. I'm so thankful I got to serve him every day that he was in the hospital last week. The little things I did there will never make up for everything that he did for me and my family. He may have never got to see me do all the things that he thought he would while he was earthside, but I know he has the best seat in the house to watch now. Love you and miss you, Grandpa T. Thanks, everyone, for letting me share his story with you today. I just thought it was really important and maybe a little cathartic for me in the process. I hope that in some small way, we all carry forward the lessons of the people who shaped us, your mom, your dad, your grandparents, the ones who taught us not through words, but through example. So thanks for listening today. Thanks for coming back. This was a tough episode, but one I knew I needed to do. I just love you, Dad, and I'll miss you, and I'll see you again. This has been Interventions and Detentions, where the real learning begins. And this one, Dad's for you. See you next week.